in the men's basketball, the men's football. Those are two that we typically see this problem in. They're starting to hedge their bets. If there's any risk of an injury that could be career-changing for them and eliminate the possibility that they go out and make that first $5 or $10 million that really sets them up financially, then I understand the position that they might be in to say, well, I want to protect myself. He's got this injury concern. He's got recovery going on, and it's a tough decision. I don't want to assume for a minute that it's easy for him to make this decision as a young man. But I do understand the complications. I do understand that there's a ramifications to this. There's consequences for the team. And really, it opens up, again, like I said, a subject that we just don't have time to discuss right now, and we've talked about it in the past, but a subject that's very important and needs to really be solved moving down the road for the NCAA, which is that compensation versus student-athlete versus what do they mean for the team versus what is the team benefiting from them. All of those things coming together make this topic what it is in being such a difficult problem to solve.
He shouldn't feel bad at all because we saw this happen with Jalen Smith from Notre Dame when he went into the bowl game and he got hurt and how it affected his draft stock and how he's really just coming back sort of to full speed even just this year. So I don't blame him at all. He played for this university. If it was the other way around and he was hurt and he didn't have a career or he had a career-ending injury after this year, Ohio State's not going to do anything to help him. I mean, maybe they give him a spot on the coaching staff, but nothing like what he could make as a potential number one pick in the NFL draft. So I don't feel like he owes Ohio State anything. I don't feel like any college athlete owes their colleges anything at this point. The amount of money that these student athletes bring into especially college football and college basketball, just the amount of money that they bring into these schools through these massive TV deals, through their sponsorships, through stadium ticket sales, and through their deals with shoe companies, that's a ton of money that these players really don't see. Yes, they get a platform to go out and perform and put themselves on tape and get a chance to be drafted, but there's not that many guys that get drafted every year versus the amount of guys that play, that if you're on the upper edge of that if you have a chance to be a top 5 pick and to cash in and make that kind of money guaranteed, you've got to do that. You've got to look out for what's best for you as a college athlete because the colleges, Eric, let's face it, they only look out for what's best for them. So I have no problem at all what Nick Bosa is doing. All right, Eric, so I got one final question for you here as we end segment 1, and I saved this one for the end of segment 1 in case I get your blood boiling, so you'll have a little bit of time during the break to get calmed down for segment 2. But we saw quite a few upsets in college football on Saturday. Georgia went down. Washington, your Penn State Nittany Lions went down. West Virginia went down. Auburn, Miami, Colorado, all top 25 teams, all took losses. So let me ask you, Eric, does anyone in this group still have a shot at making the college football playoff? And at this point, do you even care?
Hey, that's the bigger question right there. Probably at this point, only Georgia out of that list that you just read. The others, with the loss that they had and as far back as they fell, there's just too much ground to make up. And that's one of the problems, like you just said, do you even really care? That's one of the problems with college football is week 4, week 5, week 6, it could be all over for your favorite team the way that the college football playoffs are set up now. And honestly, Penn State losing to Michigan State and just being an absolute embarrassment for the second week in a row, I don't care if they go to the Alamo Bowl. I don't care if they go to the Meineke Bowl. I don't care if they go to the Talkback Podcast Bowl. I wouldn't watch them. That's just what's the problem with college football right now. So Georgia, they fell to number 8. They're still 6-1. Their strength of schedule, if they run the table in their SEC schedule, they could still make some moves. I think there's still teams ahead of them that are going to lose. So Georgia, out of that mix, is probably the only one that even matters. WVU, certainly Penn State. You know, some of these teams, they just fall too far after a loss and it's season over. And so, no, I don't really care.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Georgia's got the best chance to still make it in. If you're going to lose, you want to lose as early as possible so that when the other teams in front of you start to lose, they fall behind you and you sort of catapult them. It's just kind of how college football works and how it always has. A loss early isn't as detrimental as a loss late in the season, it seems like. So I think Georgia falling only to around 8 right now in the rankings, seeing the teams that are in front of them, a couple of those teams have a loss if they would lose again. Now, I don't think they control their own destiny. They definitely need some help, but I think they still have a shot better than a team like West Virginia that was number 6. They fall into the 12, 13 range. They need a ton of help to make any type of noise. But you hit it. If you're a college football fan and you're hoping that your team can make it to that Final Four into the playoff and they get a loss, you're basically dependent on someone else. If they get 2 losses, it's basically season over unless you're an SEC team, it feels like at this point. So that'll be a wrap for segment 1. We'll definitely have more coverage of college football as the season gets on. We're deep into conference play at this point. We'll start to see more rivalry games pick up here as we get deeper into the college football season. So we'll definitely have that covered, even though Eric doesn't like to talk about college football now that Penn State has 2 losses, but I'll still put it into the show notes. So that's a wrap for segment 1. When we come back from the break, it's time to jump into Talkworthy. What is going on in Minnesota? Can this situation be resolved? And who is to blame for the fractured relationship between Jimmy Butler and the Timberwolves? LeBron James, he's all over the place, it feels like. Will that affect him on the court? We'll talk about the controversy at the end of the race at Talladega. A track we normally see wild races at was basically a bore fest for the first part of the race. Things got kind of interesting late. One driver was left frustrated with NASCAR. And what's the best case scenario for the World Series for Major League Baseball? We'll have that when we come back. We are back, and it's Talkworthy time, and let's jump right into the drama that's taking place in Minnesota right now. I'm sure most of our listeners are well aware of what is going on with Jimmy Butler. We'll give him a quick recap here. Last year, former Chicago Bull coach and now current Minnesota Timberwolf coach Tom Thibodeau made the trade to bring Jimmy Butler from Chicago into Minnesota to try to revamp this Timberwolves team and try to get them into a position with a veteran leader to make a run in the West. We saw the T-Wolves get to the 8th seed. In the offseason, the Timberwolves offered Jimmy Butler an extension, basically about a 4-year deal worth of between $100 to $110 million. Butler and his camp said they appreciated it, but they wanted to wait to 2019 because Butler could sign a 5-year, $190 million deal. But in the summer, Jimmy Butler decided he wanted a trade. It's been a pretty hot rumor that Jimmy Butler does not get along with Karl Anthony Towns. He does not get along with Andrew Wiggins, doesn't like the way that those guys play, the way they prepare, that they just don't take the game serious enough in his opinion, or don't take it as serious as he does in his mind. Both of those players just got big deals from Minnesota, so they're going to be there for a while. Jimmy Butler demanded a trade. Now there's talk that there's friction in the front office between who actually is running things. Is it owner Glenn Taylor? Is it head coach Tom Thibodeau? There was even a deal with the Miami Heat that fell through that seemed to prompt Jimmy Butler showing up last week at Timberwolves practice, jumping in with the second unit and going off on everybody from players on the first team to the general manager of the team. And then, surprisingly, Rachel Nichols was somehow there, and he did a sit-down interview to talk about practice, which is the first time we've ever seen that happen, basically since Allen Iverson talked about practice many years ago. So, Eric, there is a lot of drama that's going on here in Minnesota. But when you look at this situation and when you start to try to break things down, who holds more blame in this situation? Is it Jimmy Butler or is it the Timberwolves?
Well, this is a fantastic beginning of the season situation because it's kind of like a soap opera. It's fun to watch, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen in Minnesota because we saw them really rising last year. Or at least we thought they were going to be a force to be reckoned with if they got into the playoffs. The problem is the NBA locker rooms are small. You have not a 53-man roster like the NFL. You have 12. And then if you count your practice squad, you've got a few more. But these locker rooms are really tight. And when they're not tight, when they're fractured, and you've got a couple of guys that really can't stand each other, there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to go. And so it can get heated and it can get really, really diseased pretty fast. Back in LeBron's days with the Miami Heat, that's one of the things I actually loved about the Heat, even though I wasn't a Heat fan, is just they looked like they were having so much fun. And if I was another team, I would want to model that locker room, that style that they had. That isn't happening in Minnesota. And I don't know, Justin, how you recover from a guy that's somewhat losing his mind over cussing at players and ripping people on the practice court and then running up one side and down the other of management and ownership. And I'm not sure how you recover from that when you're on such a small roster and there's nowhere to hide. Again, it's not the NFL. It's not an Odell. It's not a situation like Le'Veon Bell or guys that Antonio Brown, guys that can, make a little bit of a mess. And then in a week, there'll be other guys on the roster that people are talking about. In the NBA, you've got superstars, 2, maybe 3 on each team, sometimes only 1, and there's nowhere to go. And so I just think this is a huge mess. I think both of them are to blame in some ways because I think the coaches potentially have a style that's not working. They're clearly not keeping the players together on the same page, whether it's their practice styles or their approach to the game. They're not bringing these guys together as a unit, or at least it doesn't appear to be from Jimmy Butler's standpoint. But from his standpoint, if you're a leader, and, we talked about this with Odell and with others, Le'Veon Bell, you just can't behave that way because you lose all respect, you lose all integrity, your dignity is gone with your teammates when you act like that, and that's not leadership. So this probably spells the beginning of the end for a guy like Jimmy Butler in a franchise like Minnesota because there's nowhere to go. And once you break that glass, once you have shattered and fractured relationships in that locker room, as small as it is, you just have to do something about it. And so if it's not a coaching change, if it's not management changes, it's probably going to be a player change. This beginning of the season for Minnesota is going to be heated.
Yeah, for sure. This is just such a bad situation. No matter who's to blame, it's just not going to go well. I don't see this somehow fixing itself on the fly here. Jimmy Butler, every little thing's going to irritate him. It's just going to get covered because now it's in the media spotlight from this whole situation with practice and how this leaked and why ESPN was there and why he's doing an interview just hours after practice. All this stuff starts to come out and just details that he's agreeing with that are spot on. It's just a bad situation. I put some of this on Butler for requesting a trade when he's got 1 year left on his deal, and the teams that he even put on out there are not even teams that are capable of making a run at anything at this point. I mean, he had the Nets on the list, for God's sake. So I don't really know what he is doing, and then he's blaming the other guys for not playing hard enough and not being committed, and he's the guy that's asking for a trade. So a lot of that stuff doesn't make sense to me. But, Eric, we talked about this with the NFL, with the Le'Veon Bell situation, how the owners have so much control over the NFL, how the franchise tag really doesn't allow for movement. They can really sort of hinder a guy's ability at the peak of their career to get those long-term deals. And there's not the guaranteed money that is out there for these NBA players. When they sign a deal, it's completely guaranteed. We've seen that that's not the case in the NFL. The NBA is the complete opposite. The players hold all the power in the NBA. And if you get a disgruntled superstar, you really don't have a choice because look what Kawhi Leonard did last year. He still got his money and he got out of town and he's probably going to get to dictate and go where he wants to go in this offseason and still make a ton of money. You talked about it with LeBron, how you basically are not a fan necessarily of the Cavaliers or of the Heat or even of the Lakers. You're a fan of LeBron James. And that's what these franchises see, that people follow the players. Inside your little region, you'll have fans of the teams and of the organizations that suffer when a player leaves. But for the most part, most fans of the biggest players in the NBA are not fans of the teams that they play for. They're fans of just hoping that player has success, which is completely different than the NFL, where fan bases root for their team and they don't really care who comes through. They'll love a guy one day, and once he either leaves or the team gets rid of him, they just move on. The NBA is not like that. Fans just pick it up. So all those fans that had Cavalier jerseys in their closet, they've replaced those with purple and gold Lakers jerseys now. So that's the big difference here, is where the stars, they just hold all the power. And the T-Wolves, they should be aware of that this is a situation that's just, it's breaking down. And at this point, if you've signed Wiggins and you've signed Karl Anthony Towns and you believe in them, and the Butler situation, he's not going to work out there, you then as an organization have to try to salvage this and get the best pieces to put around those two guys long term. You're not winning a title this year, and if Butler's out the door next year, you get nothing for him. So don't drag your feet and think you're going to do anything in the West this year. Go out and get some young talent to put around these guys. Go get some shooters. Go get some guys that can replace what you gave up to get Butler. When you sent Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine out the door last year, you need to try to replace those guys put some more shooting around Karl Anthony Towns, around Wiggins, get some defensive help around those guys.